Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairy Tales. My name is Rory, and if you've never been here before, you are watching Varietal Literature's YouTube channel. We are, a group of writers from Vancouver who just enjoy narrative. And what we do here on Tuesday nights, on Fairy Tale Tuesday, is we read old folklore and fairy tales live here. And if you are watching it live, which most don't, but if you are, feel free to join me in the live chat. Give me your thoughts as the stories unfold. As long as it's not like shockingly bad or evil things you're saying, I'm happy to have you. But if you aren't watching this live, there is a benefit to that as well. You can go down to the description below and you can click on timestamps and it will jump you ahead to one of the 4 stories we are reading tonight. 3 of which are German in origin and the last is Irish. What they have in common though is giants. And we're going to talk a little bit about what giants often are in folklore and the role they serve, and then we're going to read these stories because they're fun, but also because they serve as examples of that. And that's what this is. Good old-fashioned storytelling of traditional stories. So I won't bog down any more than that, other than just to say one more time, if you don't want like the framing or the explanation or any sort of context going in, feel free, if you're not watching this live, to go down to the description below and click on any timestamp to any story that interests you. The first 4 are going to be quite short. As a note, they're more of sort of little lyrical tales about Germany, and then the last one is a proper sort of longer tale with a 3-act structure and so on. So make your call. It's also Irish. So on to giants in folklore. I won't say as much as I normally do about these sorts of things. I will open with the same caveat I always give, which is I am not a scholar of this stuff. There are scholars of this stuff. There's a lot of us on Mastodon who love folklore and talk to each other, so that's a good place to connect and find out more information. But I'm not a scholar or translator of folklore. But I do notice things. What I am is a writer who likes this stuff. And the one thing that stands out about giants, which is true across many cultures, I haven't read enough to say that confidently across all, but true across many cultures, is that giants normally occur to explain geographic features, or at least either the creation of them or the use of them, or they are them. So on the they are them, we're not going to read a tale about this, but so you know, one of the earliest examples that I know of is in Norse mythology, Ymir. Ymir is a giant. I think he's supposed to be the first. If I recall correctly, but it has been a little bit of time, I believe Ymir came from like dew that formed between Niflheim and Muspelheim. If you've played the God of War games, you know that's like ice and fire. Actually, I think Ymir makes an appearance in the recent God of War. But Ymir, and maybe it's not Ymir, but anyways, doesn't matter. Ymir is, in Norse myth, a very, very, very large giant who is eventually killed by 3 of the gods, among them Odin, I believe. And they use his body to form the mountains and shapes of Earth. And so it is said that the Earth is like his body. Which is, I think you can take somewhat literally, but more, I think you'll find more lyrically from that. And that's just an early example of it. But what we're going to see is that very often, whether it's their body literally, like a giant died there, we're not going to see any real examples of that, but that's an early one. Or whether it's something giants did that create geographic artifacts or notable landmarks in lands. Usually something to do with rocks or mountains. And so we're going to see a lot of that. We are pulling from 2 different sources today. The first 3 stories come from our old friend Jürgen Hubert, who has a collection of German folklore he's translating. He has a Patreon, which I will have in the pinned comment below if you're not watching it live, that you should definitely go and support. But he is translating a bunch of stuff that's never been translated to English from German folklore archives, and makes them available on his Patreon. And we're going to read 3 stories from there that are all basically stories of how giants created landmark geography in Germany. But then we're going to read something from Yeats's collection. Yes, W.B. Yeats, the poet. If you don't know him, it's easy enough to find examples of his poetry. He's an Irish poet, an excellent poet, by the way, one of my all-time favorite poets. But he also was a, let's say, true believer in the folklore and the little people and the pagan histories of Ireland. And he has collected tales. I mean, he's long dead, but this was back at the turn of the century. He collected tales in a slightly dated title, which is Tales from, I believe it's the Irish Peasantry or something like that. Anyways, we're going to read a story from him called The Giant's Stairs, which of course is a reference to the Giant's Causeway, which is an Irish... I mean, you've seen it. You may not know that was what it was called. It's a very bizarre and unique geographic feature. Yeah, so that's what we're doing. GS says, good evening. Wow, that's fantastic art, isn't it? As per usual, I do a bit of the coloring on it because these things are all black and white. I'm no great artist, and I think that's clear. But I did find that picture very compelling. I believe it's from, I'm blanking on the name, but the famous tale of, no, can't remember the name. But it is from a famous tale. Okay. Well, it's good to have you, GS. And again, if you're watching live, feel free to join in the live chat as you see fit. All right. Just make sure everything is displaying as it's meant to. Let me turn down my fire a little bit. And we'll talk about what happens first when a giant drops its spectacles or glasses. But give me a moment here. Also, who is your favorite giant in media? While you wait. I am curious. I am partial to the Iron Giant. I know that's not a true giant, but I do like the Iron Giant. And for those who don't know the Iron Giant, it was a late 90s animated movie that was surprisingly well written and impactful. And a metaphor for basically a sentient atomic bomb. Okay. Our first tale tonight is called The Spectacles Near Lehe. And it is, it is a story from Jürgen Hubert's collection of translations of German folklore called Sunken Castles, Evil Poodles, which has a Patreon that you can access from the pinned comment below. The next three tales are going to come from Jürgen Hubert's collection and are going to be German in origin. The last one this evening, the longest, is going to come from Yeats' collection of Irish folklore. In the Lehe Hada Heath, to the right of the path from Lehe, to the Vermoor, there are 2 circular bogs a short distance away from each other, which have a resemblance to a pair of spectacles. They are thus called Barilla, and are owned by the local Lutheran parish. Now, a few hundred steps to the north of these bogs, there are 2 hills, which are also next to each other, and which have already been partially stripped as a part of the cultivation of the heath for agriculture. Now, in the days when they were still giants on the earth, a giant lived within those hills, and he led a very simple life. But he kept a dwarf as his servant, whom he used as a messenger and sent to the neighboring villages when he became old and feeble himself. One day, however, he sent the dwarf to the village of Sparen. In the giant's opinion, the dwarf was away too long. For the old giant had covered the same distance with only a few steps in his younger days. Well, the dwarf had to do several thousands of them. Full of longing, the giant waited for the arrival of the dwarf, but the dwarf was not yet visible. Then the giant thought, "Perhaps I can't see him because he is so small, and my eyes have darkened with age. I shall thus put on my spectacles and use them to see if he is coming." Well, he put his spectacles on his nose and took several steps forward into the direction of the dwarf. But since he had to hold his nose high because of his spectacles, he did not see the bumps and holes of the heath at his feet. Thus he stumbled and fell so clumsily to his knees that his spectacles flew from his nose. Out of rage, he grabbed them and threw them far away. Giants are temperamental folk, and as he saw them as the cause of his fall, he took his vengeance. And he surely would have thrown the dwarf after those spectacles, for he was much enraged by the dwarf's, in his opinion, far too long absence. But as a result, he stomped on the ground so heavily that it trembled like an earthquake. Now the dwarf was not very far away at that time, but the giant had not spotted him while he looked through his spectacles, just as the dwarf had not seen the giant due to the long heather shrubs on the side of the road which blocked the little dwarf's view. Thus the dwarf believed that there was an earthquake as the ground trembled under his feet. The spectacles had fallen into a swamp and sank deeply into it, and while later the old giant would have liked to have retrieved them, he was unable to fish them out of the swamp, for surely he would have sunk into it because of his weight. The dwarf, on the other hand, could hardly move the spectacles, let alone carry them. Thus the spectacles had to remain there, and still lie there to this day under a layer of peat, which has accumulated in the centuries since the death of the giant, and which precisely show the locations where the lenses of the spectacles are. Between the two bogs there is a small strip of heath where the nose bridge of the spectacles is buried, and beneath one of the two nearby hills the giant lies buried, but nobody can say beneath which one. Now here is the thing that I wanted to mention. This is my favorite style of tale. My favorite style of tale is the one that explains or gives reason to natural phenomenon. I'm going to go on to the next story, which is going to do the same as well, but it does remind me of a Norwegian tale we read probably a year ago at this point of the man who gets a salt mill that continuously produces salt. He makes a fortune off it, but then his boat sinks with it on it. And that's supposed to be why the sea is salty. And I just love stuff like that. That is my favorite. So I particularly like this run of tales because it's all about explaining things. I've never seen these spectacle swamps in the bog that they're talking about, and I certainly wonder if they are still visible. I'm sure Jürgen, who often watches these in comments, can let me know because he tends to go and visit these places. But carrying on. GS says, "Oh, that's what earthquakes are." Of course. Of course. Have you ever heard a child throw a tantrum? Did you not wonder if a giant was on its way? Our next tale is called The Giantess of Mirow, which also comes to us from Jürgen Hubert's collection, Sunken Castles, Evil Poodles. It's a very short one, this, but it also does the same job of explaining the geography. Now, when there were still giants living in the area of Mirow, a giantess once drove her pigs out into the fields and reached the field borders of Shilostaf. A farmer was working in the fields there, and the giantess picked up the farmer along with his plow and his oxen and put them into her apron and carried everything home. Why? Only the giant knew. When she made her way home, it was her husband who ordered her to throw everything out. Can't have little men and oxens running around. That's how you get an infestation. In return, the farmers gathered around the abode of the giant from all sides and set it ablaze. Now, the giants gathered on Washberg Mountain and decided to destroy the Tower of Mirow by throwing boulders at it. And two of the hurled boulders, which had an impression of a normal human hand, can still be found in 1836 along the way from Lehe to Neifeld. And close to them, another one is located, which has the impression of a human posterior, better known as a butt. Which I guess implies they bounced it there with their butt cheeks, which is just a delightful detail. They twerked a castle to death, I think is what they're saying. Okay. Now, our last German story before we get on to our longer Irish legendarium about saving children and being a hero and a little bit of higher and Irish comedy, is called The Legend of the Giant Stone, which I could find a picture of, but for a variety of technical reasons, I wasn't able to bring it up today, but you can find imagery of this, or at least something that claims to be it. Maybe it's not. So our next tale is called The Legend of the Giant Stone, which comes to us from Jürgen Hubert's translations of collected German folklore, Sunken Castles, Evil Poodles, which you can support at the link in the comment below. The towering masses of the Riesenstein or Giant Stone rock formation rise up boldly in the west and south of the castle ruins of Heidelberg. A rock perched upon another rock. And the following legend is told of this formation. In ancient times, when Heidelberg hadn't been founded yet, and the castle had not yet been built on its heights, a giant came from distant lands, but nobody knows where from. And that giant settled down on the right-hand side of the river Neckar. Together with his son, he held in his hands strange plants indeed, and for those he dug holes into the ground with his hands and lowered them down with their roots. Then they grew there, and from their fruits he pressed the most delicious wine. And with astonishment and fear the people beheld the activities of this strange giant man. But from time to time the old one was away from the mountain, but only left his boy behind. And that boy enjoyed gathering rocks, or plucking them from the mountain and letting them roll downhill so that they would fall into the Neckar and dam the splashing water. For us, it may be boulders, but for the little boy, it was merely a pebble. These rocks would bar the way for boatmen traveling down the river. and some of them are still seen within the Neckar today. And when the old one returned and saw this, he felt mighty joy at this pastime of the boy. But when he returned home from one of his travels one day, the young giant, his son, asked him from where he returned and where he went to every time he left the mountain. And the old one said he had great pleasure in journeying to the cities of the humans and starting fights with them, as well as tearing down their walls, a simple feat for one as large as him. Then the giant's son told his father, "Take me with you when you go abroad next time, so that I can return with the same merry face as you from this foray." But the old giant replied, "I must first test your strength to see if you are ready for such a venture, and then shall I give you a task to this end." And he ripped out the largest rock from the mountain, and he swung it in his hands and hurled it far beyond the Neckar, so that it tore deeply into the ground when it crushed the forest on the other side. But when the young giant saw this, he was thrilled, and he ripped an even larger rock out of the mountain with his hands, and then he likewise swung and hurled it through the whistling air, so that it fell right on the center of the other rock that his father had thrown, and pushed that rock ever deeper into the trembling, shaking ground. Now the father became fearful of the strength of his own son after that, and turned around and walked away into the wide world. Undeterred, the son followed him in a merry mood. Where they went, nobody has heard, and they never came back. But the rocks which they had hurled across the river are called Riesenstein, or Giant Stone, until this day. All right. So now we know about some rocks in Germany, which is interesting to me, of course. But let's go on to Ireland. Now, it's been some time since we've read some Irish stories, so I need to give my caveat again. So, before I do these streams, this is pulling back the screen a little bit. Before I do these streams, I take words I don't know from the stories I'm going to read, and I go and try to find pronunciations of them, some approximation, and I write sort of phonetically how they're spoken. Sometimes not to great effect, because if you don't know, every language has some sort of aspect of tongue-mouth arrangement that you lose if you don't know that language from a certain age. And it's very hard to get back, and in some cases impossible. So there are things that I just simply cannot hear or say. Now, none of that is really a problem here. The main problem with the next story. The next story is Irish. Irish is its own language. I believe it's a branch off the Gaelic tree, but it is distinct from what's called Scottish Gaelic. It's just called Irish. The problem is for many terrible historical reasons, it's not as well supported as German or Norwegian in online resources. It's a smaller sort of grouping of languages. And as a result, trying to find the pronunciations of what are apparently, because I do know some people who speak Irish, a bit archaic in places, uses of Irish from Yeats, means that at times I just have to guess at the pronunciation of some things in this story because I cannot find anyone saying these words. And it's a language I don't speak, and so the pronunciation is a guess. In some cases. So if you do, and I do apologize, but that is, I just wanted to know that I put good effort into trying to avoid that. But nonetheless. For the most part, this is going to be names that I don't know, and it doesn't really affect much else in the story. On to the story, I suppose, then. Let's get ourselves a little bit of Irish. Okay. Our last story of the evening, and our longest and most adventurous, is The Giant's Stairs, which was collected from an Irish fellow named T. Crofton Croker, but it was collected by W.B. Yeats, the famous Irish poet, and put into a book, which you can read for free off of Gutenberg.org, called The Fairy and Folk Tales of the Irish Peasantry. And I do want to open with a little bit of Yeats's notes on giants. And I always find these interesting. It's only a small section, because Yeats is what I call a true believer. Yeats definitely took very seriously the idea of the reality of the things these folk stories were discussing. You may or may not, but I find it interesting that he does. So here is what Yeats has to say about giants. When the pagan gods of Ireland, the Tuath, see that's not the right way, Tuath de Danann, robbed of worship and gathering, grew smaller and smaller in the popular imagination until they turned into the fairies. I don't know if that's established anywhere but Yeats. The pagan heroes, on the other hand, grew bigger and bigger until they turned into the giants, which is a very different conception of giants. On the road between Passage and Cork, there is an old mansion called Ronan's Court, and it may be easily known for the stack of chimneys and the gable ends which are to be seen. Look at it which way you will. Here it was that Maurice Ronan and his wife Margaret Gould kept house, as may be learned to this day from the great old chimney piece on which it is carved their arms. And they were a mighty worthy couple, and had but one son, who was called Philip, after no less a person than the King of Spain himself. Now immediately on his smelling the cold air of this world, that child sneezed, which was naturally taken to be a good sign of his having a clear head. And the subsequent rapidity of his learning was truly amazing, for the very first day a primer was put into his hands, he tore out the A, B, and C page and destroyed it as a thing quite beneath his notice. No wonder then that both father and mother were proud of their heir, who gave such indisputable proofs of genius, or as they called it in that part of the world, genus. One morning, however, Master Phil, who was then just 7 years old, was missing, and no one could tell what had become of him. Servants were sent in all directions to seek him on horseback and on foot. But when they returned, they did so without any tidings of the boy, whose disappearance altogether was most unaccountable. Now a large reward was offered, but it would produce them no intelligence, and years rolled away, one after another, without Mr. and Mrs. Ronan having obtained any satisfactory account of the fate of their lost little child, Philip. There lived at this time, near Carlin, one Robert Kelly, a blacksmith by trade. He was what is termed a handyman, and his abilities were held in much estimation by the lads and lasses of the neighborhood, for independent of shoeing horses, which he did to great perfection, and making plough irons, which is the iron that you drag through the field, he interpreted dreams for the young woman, sung Arthur O'Bradley at their weddings, and was so good-natured a fellow at a christening that he was gossip to half the country round. In other words, people wanted to date him. Now it happened that Robin had a dream himself. And in it, young Philip Ronan appeared to him at the dead hour of the night. Robin thought he saw the boy mounted upon a beautiful white horse. And that he told him how he was made a page to the giant Man McMahon, who had carried him off, and who held his court in the hard heart of the rock. "The 7 years my time of service are clean out, Robin," said he, "and if you release me this night, I will be making of you forever after." "And how will I know?" said Robin, cunning enough even in his sleep. "But this is all a dream." "Take that," said the boy, "for a token." And at the word, the white horse struck him in the forehead with one of his hind legs, and gave poor Robin such a kick in the forehead. Thinking he was a dead man, he roared as loud as he could after his brains, and woke up calling 1,000 murders. But found himself in bed, though he had the mark of a blow, the regular print of a horseshoe, upon his forehead, as red as blood. And Robin Kelly, who never found himself puzzled at the dream of any other person, didn't know what to think of his own. Isn't that so commonly the case, though? Now Robin was well acquainted with the giant's stairs, as indeed who is not that knows the harbor? And they consist of great masses of rock, which piled one above the other rise like a flight of steps from very deep water against the bold cliff of Carriganman. Now, nor are they badly suited for stairs to those who have legs of sufficient length to stride over the moderate-sized house, or to enable them to clear the space of a mile in a hop, step, and a jump. Both these feats the giant McMahon was said to have performed in the days of Finian glory, and common tradition of the country placed his dwelling within the cliff up whose side the stairs led. Such was the impression which the dreams made on Robin that he determined to put its truth to the test. And so it occurred to him, however, before setting out on this adventure, that a plough iron may be no bad companion, as, from his experience, he knew it was an excellent knock-down argument, having on more occasions than one settled a little disagreement very quietly. I feel like this implies he might have killed a man. So putting one on his shoulder, off he marched in the cool of the evening, through Glan Fawk, or the Hawk's Glen, to Monkstown. Here an old gossip of his, Tom Clancy by name, lived, who, on hearing Robin's dream, promised him the use of his skiff, and moreover offered to assist him in rowing to the giant's stairs. After a supper, which was of the best, they embarked. It was a beautiful still night, and the little boat glided swiftly along. The regular dip of the oars and the distant song of the sailor, sometimes the voice of a belated traveler at the ferry of Cargalow, also broke the quietness of the land and the sea and sky. And the tide was in their favor, and in a few minutes Robin and his gossip rested on their oars under the dark shadow of the giant's stairs. And Robin looked anxiously for the entrance to the giant's palace, which it was said may be found by anyone seeking it, but only at midnight. But no such entrance could he see. Well, Robin's impatience had hurried him there before that time, and after waiting a considerable space in a state of suspense not to be described, Robin, with pure vexation, could not help exclaiming to his companion, "'Tis a pair of fools we are, Tom Clancy, for coming here at all on the strength of a dream." "And whose doing is it," said Tom, "but your own?" At the moment he spoke, they perceived a faint glimmering of light to proceed from the cliff, which gradually increased until a porch big enough for a king's palace unfolded itself, almost on level with the water. So they pulled the skiff directly toward the opening, and Robin Kelly, seizing his plow iron, boldly entered with a strong hand and a stout heart. Wild and strange was that entrance, the whole of which appeared to form grim, grotesque faces, blending so strangely each with the other that it was impossible to define any. The chin of one formed the nose of another. What appeared to be fixed and stern eye, if dwelt upon, changed to a gaping mouth. And the lines of the lofty forehead grew into a majestic, flowing beard. Now the more Robin allowed himself to contemplate the forms around him, the more terrific they became. And the stony expressions of the crowd of faces assumed a savage ferocity, as his imagination converted feature after feature into a different shape and character, losing the twilight in which these indefinite forms were visible. He advanced through a dark and devious passage, whilst a deep and rumbling noise sounded as if the rock was about to close upon him and swallow him alive forever. And now, indeed, poor Robin felt afraid. "Robin, Robin," said he, "if you are a fool for coming here, what in the name of fortune are you now?" But as before, he had scarcely spoken when he saw a small light twinkling through the darkness of the distance like a star in the midnight sky. To retreat was out of the question, for so many turnings and windings were in the passage that he considered he had but little chance of making his way back. He therefore proceeded towards the bit of light, and came at last into a spacious chamber, from the roof of which hung the solitary lamp that had guided him. And it emerged from such profound gloom that the single light afforded abundant light to several gigantic figures seated around a massive stone table. As if in serious deliberation, but no word disturbed the breathless silence which prevailed. And at the head of this table he recognized Man MacMahon himself, whose majestic beard had taken root and in the course of ages grown into the stone slab. He was the first who perceived Robin, and instantly, starting up, drew his long beard out from the huge pieces of rock in such haste, and with so sudden a jerk, that it was shattered into 1,000 pieces. "What seek you?" he demanded in a voice of thunder. "I come," answered Robin with as much boldness as he could put on, for his heart was fluttering and almost fainting within him. I come," said he, "to claim Philip Ronan, whose time of service is out this night." "And who sent you here?" said the giant. "'Twas of my own accord I came," said Robin. "Then you must single him out from among my pages," said the giant. "And if you fix on the wrong one, your life is the forfeit to me. Follow me." He led Robin into a hall of vast extent and filled with lights along either side, which were rows of beautiful children, all apparently 7 years old, and none beyond that age, dressed in green, and everyone exactly dressed alike. "Here," said man, "you are free to take Philip Ronan, if you will, but remember I give but one choice." Robin was sadly perplexed, for there were hundreds upon hundreds of children, and he had no clear recollection of the boy he sought. And he walked along the hall by the side of man, as if nothing was the matter. He knew not to show his hand, although with his great iron dress clanked fearfully at every step, sounding louder than Robin's own sledge battering on his anvil. They had nearly reached the end without speaking when Robin, seeing that the only means he had was to make friends with the giant, determined to try what effect a soft words might have. "'Tis a fine wholesome appearance the poor children carry," remarked Robin, "although they have been here so long shut out from fresh air and the blessed light of heaven. 'Tis tenderly, your honour, must have reared them." "Aye," said the giant, "this is true for you. So give me your hand, for you are, I believe, a very honest fellow for a blacksmith." As a note, blacksmiths were generally seen as sort of wild childs. Robin, at the first look, did not much like the huge size of the hand, and therefore presented instead his plow iron for a shake, which the giant, seizing in its massive mitt, twisted in his grasp round and round again as if it had been a potato stalk. On seeing this, all the children sent up a shout of laughter. In the midst of their mirth, Robin thought he heard his name called, and all ear and eye he put his hand on the boy who he fancied had spoken, crying out at the same time, "Let me live or die for it, but this is the young Phil Ronan." "Is it?" And the children about him said, "It is Philip Ronan, happy Philip Ronan," said his young companions, and in an instant the hall became dark, and crashing noises were heard. And all was in strange confusion, but Robin held fast his prize, and found himself lying soon, in the grey dawn of morning, at the head of the giant's stairs, with a little boy grasped in his arms. Robin had plenty of gossips to spread the story of his wonderful adventure. Passage, Monkstown, Carlin, the whole barony of Kerry run with it. "Are you quite sure, Robin, it is young Phil Ronan you've brought back with you?" was the regular question, for although the boy had been 7 years away, his appearance now was just the same as on the day he was missed. He'd neither grown taller nor older in look, and he spoke of things which had happened before he was carried off as one awakened from a sleep, or if they had occurred yesterday. Am I sure? Well, that's a queer question," was Robin's reply. "Seeing the boy has the blue eye of the mother and the foxy hair of the father, to say nothing of the purty wart on the right side of his little nose." However, Robin Kelly may have been questioned. The worthy couple of Ronan's Coat doubted not that he was the deliverer of their child, and from the power of the giant McMahon. And the reward they bestowed on him equaled their gratitude. Philip Ronan lived on to be an old man, and he was remarkable to the day of his death for his skill in working brass and iron, which it was believed he had learned during his 7-year apprenticeship with the giant man McMahon. Jess says a blacksmith burn there. Yes. Yeah, I will openly admit, I don't know why. I mean, they're just sort of blue collar workers. I guess why wouldn't they be? But I'm always surprised at like the reputation that blacksmiths had. They're like rock star reputation. Gia says, how odd all 7-year-olds. 7 is a significant number in folklore. Exactly why, I couldn't tell you. But it is a number that comes up often. Like he's I should give examples, but there's the tales we read, I think they were Irish as well, or maybe Scottish, but I think they were Irish, of fae folk taking people away for 7 days, which was 7 years in our time, or things like that. And 7 years is a number that comes up a lot, as is 3, but 3, it tends to be things happen in 3s, but 7 years, yeah. And I know that it has some significance in the Bible. I don't know how well established that was on a theological level at this point, so there might be something to that. Anyhow, there is actually quite a few other stories about giants I could have brought in. I just sort of had to pick stuff that would fit roughly the time frame I had, because many of them are longer or very short. But giants are very often presented this way. Now, in this story, it's a little less direct, but it is sort of... I will say it's not made clear that the giant created the giant's steps, or the giant's causeway, for access to its castle. But I do feel like that's what this story was implying. And I guess what I like, because I mentioned earlier, I really like that aspect of folklore. I guess what I like about that is if anything, the point of a story is to draw someone's attention to meaning in the world. Whether that's the meaning of a laugh, or whether that's the meaning of something far more significant and personal. But, the point of a story is to make the world something sensible to a human with lived experience. And so, I don't abrade or push against the explanations as to, I think it's basalt, why it does its little hexagon thing and creates steps and whatever else. I don't pretend to say that finding those literal explanations in chemistry terms or in geological terms are not interesting. But I think one of the unique features of a human being is the ways in which we can draw human-like stories from everything. The way that the world gains meaning for us when we give it narrative. And, I think there's value in seeing the world narratively. it's hard for me to put my finger on it. Like, it's not a kind of value that I can argue for, you know. It's an instinctual thing, I suppose. But I do like the value of looking at a stone and thinking, what might it have been to other people? What put it there? What stories sit in the world around you? Because the truth is, we don't know most of the stories of the world. They die with the people who knew them. But we know that there are stories to the world. That if you could, like they do in certain iterations of Star Wars, if you could touch an object and hear what it heard and whatever else, you wouldn't maybe hear giants, but you would hear great tales and stories and people struggling to move a boulder on a farm and how that created whatever else. So I don't think the literal truth of it is as important as the fact that it simply widens and enriches your experience of a walk around your neighborhood. Which in North America we have none of. Just none of. You know, that those sort of stories, they are still around, but for numerous reasons, not the least of which being genocides, they aren't pervasive in our culture. And so you walk around your neighborhood and it's sort of, yeah, that tree was planted in the 50s to help sell houses, and like, you know, it's a different kind of thing. Still have the mountains though, so I'd be curious what the stories are on the Rockies, that great big spine of our coast. Anyhow, now I'm just being a meandering old man. Too poetic for my own good. Which means that it is time to cut myself off. So again, if you want to read more stories like this or hear more stories like this, you can go through Fireside Fairy Tales as our playlist on our channel. Under a playlist. If you enjoyed this, by the way, please consider giving me a like. The summers are a little rough for views. People are out enjoying the sun like fools. No, I kid. I'm glad you're out enjoying your world. But yeah, I mean, it just helps YouTube know that this might be something other people would enjoy. And consider subscribing if you haven't. If you do want to help, I mean, in other ways, like today, I had to do some hatchet work on some lights of mine to make them work. You can give to my coffee, sort of buy me a coffee link in the description below, but you know, you don't have to do that. Beyond that, I enjoyed my time with you by the fireside here in the middle of summer. So you have a good sleep, and I'll keep the fire as warm as it needs to be.